My name is Thomas Parker. I'm 65 years old, a retired high school teacher from Portland, Oregon. I never expected to be sitting in an upscale restaurant, discovering that my son-in-law had been stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for me. But life has a way of surprising you, especially when family is involved. My daughter Sarah had made it big in tech, founding a successful software company that she sold for millions 3 years ago. Meanwhile, her husband Mark worked as her company's financial officer, managing their considerable wealth. I'd always been proud of them both, though lately something felt off about Mark's behavior. The evening started normally enough. Sarah had invited me to celebrate her latest business venture, a new startup she was funding. The restaurant was one of those places where they don't put prices on the menu, the kind of establishment I could never have afforded on a teacher's salary. "Dad, how are you managing with the monthly gifts?" "I hope they're making retirement more comfortable," Sarah asked while cutting into her Wagyu steak. I looked up, confused. What monthly gifts? The sound of breaking glass made everyone at nearby tables turn. Mark's hand had gone limp, sending his wine glass crashing to the floor. His face turned a shade whiter than the tablecloth. "The $10,000 monthly transfers I've been sending for the past 4 years," Sarah said, her voice rising slightly. "Ever since I sold the company. Mark's been handling all the transfers." The pieces started falling into place. 4 years, $10,000 per month. $480,000 total. Money I had never seen a penny of. Mark dabbed his face with a napkin, avoiding eye contact. "There must be some mistake," he stammered. "The accounts? I'll have to check." But I knew there was no mistake. The nervous glances, the sudden interest in my retirement planning, the way he had discouraged Sarah from discussing finances with me directly, it all made sense now. "Mark," Sarah's voice had gone cold. "What did you do?" I sat there quietly, watching my son-in-law unravel. In that moment, I remembered something from 3 years ago. Mark had shown up at my house unexpectedly, asking about my retirement accounts and suggesting I let him optimize my investments. I declined, trusting my modest pension and savings. He'd seemed unusually irritated by my refusal. "I can explain," Mark said, his words tumbling out. "The market was volatile. I was going to replace it, make it back with interest." Sarah's face hardened. "You've been stealing from my father." Other diners were starting to stare. A waiter hovered nearby, probably wondering if he should intervene. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private," I suggested, maintaining the calm demeanor I developed over 30 years of handling high school drama. We left the restaurant and drove to Sarah and Mark's house in the West Hills. The view of Portland's lights would normally have been beautiful, but tonight they only highlighted the growing tension. In their home office, Mark pulled up financial records on his computer. His hands shook as he logged in. The evidence was damning. Every month for 4 years, $10,000 had been transferred from Sarah's personal account to a separate account Mark controlled. From there, the money had been moved to various investment accounts, all in his name. "I was trying to build something bigger," Mark explained desperately. "The crypto market was booming. I could have tripled the money." "Could have." Sarah's voice was razor sharp. Mark's silence said everything. The money was gone. I watched my daughter's marriage implode in real time. 12 years of trust crumbled in minutes. But oddly, I felt no anger. Perhaps my years of teaching had taught me that people's actions often came from places of desperation rather than malice. "How much is left?" I asked quietly. Mark pulled up another screen. $43,000, he whispered. Sarah was on the phone with her lawyer before Mark finished speaking. I sat in one of their expensive leather chairs, thinking about all the times Mark had offered financial advice, suggested investment opportunities, and discouraged me from hiring a financial advisor of my own. He'd been covering his tracks all along. But something didn't add up. Mark had always been careful, methodical. This kind of desperate gambling seemed out of character. I'd seen enough students hide problems over the years to recognize when there was more to the story. "Mark," I said, while Sarah stepped into another room to continue her legal conversation. "What really happened?" He looked at me, shoulders slumped. For a moment, I saw not the polished financial officer, but a scared man drowning in something bigger than himself. "They said they'd ruin me," he whispered. "Said they had evidence of irregularities from Sarah's company sale. Threatened to go to the SEC." "Who did?" "Former board members. They wanted inside information about Sarah's new ventures. When I refused, they started digging into my past. Found mistakes I'd made during the company sale. Small things, but enough to destroy my career, maybe even land me in jail. They said they'd keep quiet if I helped them." The picture became clearer. Mark had been stealing my money to pay blackmail, hoping to protect both his career and Sarah's reputation. A wrong choice leading to more wrong choices, a spiral I'd seen too many times in troubled students. When Sarah returned, her face was set in stone. "The lawyers will be here in the morning. They're already preparing divorce papers." "Sarah," I started, but she cut me off. "Dad, don't defend him. He stole from you. Used you. There's no excuse." She was right, of course. But life is rarely simple. "Before you make any final decisions," I said, "there's something you need to hear." Over the next hour, Mark explained everything. The blackmail, the threats, his desperate attempts to protect Sarah's reputation by sacrificing my financial security. With each revelation, Sarah's expression shifted from anger to shock to a complex mix of emotions I couldn't quite read. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked Mark. "They said they'd release everything if I did. Your reputation, the new company, everything would be at risk." Sarah stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. "You should have trusted me," she said quietly. "We could have fought them together." The next few hours were a blur of phone calls. Sarah's security team was contacted. Her lawyers shifted focus from divorce proceedings to building a case against the blackmailers. Evidence was gathered, including emails and transfer records Mark had carefully preserved. As dawn approached, Sarah turned to me. "Dad, I'm so sorry. We'll make this right. Every penny will be repaid." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. The people behind this, they're still out there. Still threatening other companies, other families. Sarah's expression changed. I recognized that look. It was the same one she'd had as a little girl when standing up to playground bullies. "Not for long," she said. Mark spent the next week working with Sarah's lawyers, providing every detail of his interactions with the blackmailers. The evidence painted a picture of systematic corporate extortion reaching far beyond our family. I insisted on being part of the solution. Not for the money. Sarah had already transferred the full $480,000 to my account. But because 30 years of teaching had taught me that sometimes the best lessons come from facing our mistakes directly. The investigation moved quickly. Sarah's legal team discovered that the blackmailers had targeted at least 6 other tech companies in similar schemes. Their method was always the same. Find a vulnerable executive, usually someone with minor financial irregularities in their past, and squeeze them for inside information or money. Mark's cooperation proved invaluable. He had documented every interaction, every threat, every payment. His financial training, ironically, had made him meticulous even in his deception. The FBI became involved when the scope of the operation became clear. I sat in on many of the meetings, watching my daughter transform from a betrayed wife into a determined CEO fighting back against corporate extortion. Mark, despite everything, worked tirelessly to make amends. The man I saw now was different from the polished son-in-law who had stolen my money. This Mark was humbled, desperate to right his wrongs. The ringleader is James Whitman, Mark explained during one particularly tense meeting. Former board member of 3 tech companies, all of which experienced mysterious leaks of sensitive information. He approached me 6 months after Sarah's company sale. Sarah's security team pulled up Whitman's profile. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s, gray hair, expensive suits, the kind of person who radiated trustworthiness while hiding a predator's instincts. He knew about some corners I'd cut during the company's sale. Mark continued. Minor stuff. Backdated documents, rounded numbers and reports. Nothing illegal, but enough to raise questions. He said he could make it go away for a price. And that price was my father's money. Sarah's voice was tight. Mark shook his head. At first, he just wanted information about your new ventures. Said his clients needed to stay competitive. When I refused, he threatened to expose everything. That's when the demands for money started. I listened, thinking about how fear can drive good people to terrible decisions. As a teacher, I'd seen countless students make poor choices out of desperation. Mark was no different, just operating on a larger scale with higher stakes. Sarah's new head of security, a former FBI agent named Diana Reynolds, laid out their strategy. We're setting up a sting. Mr. Parker, we'd like your help. I raised an eyebrow. Me? I'm just a retired teacher. Exactly, Diana smiled. They won't expect you to be part of this. We want to arrange a meeting with Whitman. Make him think you've discovered the missing money and are willing to keep quiet for a price. The plan was simple but risky. I would meet Whitman, wearing a wire, and express my anger over the stolen money. But instead of threatening exposure, I'd suggest a partnership. The goal was to get him to reveal details about his other operations. Sarah objected immediately. It's too dangerous. Dad, you don't have to do this. But I thought about my students over the years and how many times I told them to stand up to bullies. Yes, I do, I said. People like Whitman prey on fear. It's time someone stood up to them. The meeting was arranged at an upscale bar downtown. I wore a wire so thin it was practically invisible, with Sarah's security team monitoring from various positions around the venue. Mark had made the initial contact, telling Whitman that I'd discovered the theft and needed to be handled. Whitman arrived exactly on time, every inch the successful businessman. He ordered an expensive scotch and studied me with calculating eyes. Mr. Parker, he smiled. I understand you've had some concerns about your daughter's financial arrangements. I played my role, the angry but calculating father. You mean the money your friend Mark has been stealing from me? Yes, I have concerns. Whitman's smile didn't waver. An unfortunate situation, but one that could become very complicated if handled improperly. I taught high school for 30 years, Mr. Whitman. I understand complicated situations. I also understand opportunities when I see them. His eyebrows rose slightly. I had his attention. You've built quite an operation, I continued. Using people's mistakes against them, gathering information, controlling companies from the shadows. Very impressive. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, Mr. Parker. I leaned forward. I'm suggesting that a retired teacher with access to his daughter's new company might be valuable to someone in your position. More valuable alive and cooperative than exposed and discredited. Whitman studied me for a long moment, then chuckled. You know, most people in your position react with moral outrage. Threats of exposure, legal action. It's refreshing to meet someone who sees the bigger picture. He took a sip of his scotch and began explaining his operation. How he identified targets, gathered leverage, and built his network of compromised executives. Each word was another nail in his coffin, recorded by the wire I wore. Of course, he concluded, if you're interested in an arrangement, we'd need some assurance of your cooperation. Perhaps the demonstration of your commitment. What did you have in mind? He pulled out his phone and showed me a document. Your daughter's new project. We understand it involves quantum computing applications. My clients would be very interested in the details. I glanced at the document, buying time for the surveillance team to photograph it. And in return, let's say $50,000 per month. More than what Mark was supposedly sending you, and this time you'll actually receive it. I pretended to consider the offer, watching as Diana's team moved into position around the bar. You know, Mr. Whitman, there's something I learned in 30 years of teaching. What's that? The bullies always fall eventually. His smile froze as FBI agents appeared at his elbows. The evidence was overwhelming. The recorded conversation, the document he'd shown me, the financial trails Mark had documented. James Whitman, the sophisticated extortionist, was led out in handcuffs. The aftermath was swift. Whitman's network unraveled as other victims came forward. Mark's cooperation and my sting operation had broken open one of the largest corporate extortion cases in recent history. But there was still a personal fallout to deal with. Sarah and Mark sat in their living room the next evening, the city lights twinkling below, trying to rebuild what trust they could. I can't just forgive and forget, Sarah said quietly. But I understand why you did it. I wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me. Mark nodded. I was a coward. I thought I could handle it myself, protect everyone. Instead, I just made everything worse. I watched them from the kitchen, making coffee and thinking about second chances. Sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most valuable things. The following weeks brought significant changes for everyone involved. The FBI's investigation expanded, revealing that Whitman's operation had tentacles reaching into dozens of tech companies across the country. Each day brought new revelations, more victims stepping forward, more executives admitting to being blackmailed. I returned to my modest home in the suburbs, trying to process everything that had happened. The $480,000 Sarah had repaid me sat untouched in my account. Money that could have made my retirement considerably more comfortable had been restored, but something else needed fixing first. One morning, I received an unexpected visit from Diana Reynolds, the security chief who had helped orchestrate the sting. Mr. Parker, she said, settling into my worn armchair, there's something you should know about James Whitman. He's talking. Trying to make a deal. She nodded. He's offering information about other operations, bigger players. Your son-in-law wasn't the only one being squeezed. This goes deeper than we thought. I poured us both coffee in my old teaching mugs, the ones with faded motivational quotes my students had given me years ago. How much deeper? Corporate espionage, market manipulation, blackmail at the highest levels. Whitman was just a middleman. There are investment firms, hedge funds, even some political connections involved. I thought about Mark, trapped in that web of threats and lies. What does this mean for my family? Diana set down her mug. Sarah's new company might be at risk. Whitman's associates won't be happy about his arrest. They might try to retaliate. The protective instinct that had served me well during my teaching career kicked in. What can we do? We're setting up protection, monitoring threats. But there's something else we'd like your help with. She paused. Your background as a teacher, the way you handled Whitman. We could use someone like you. I raised an eyebrow. I'm a bit old for a new career in law enforcement. She smiled. Not as an agent. As a consultant. Someone who can talk to people, help them feel safe coming forward. Many of Whitman's victims are still afraid to speak up. The idea was intriguing. Spending my retirement helping others stand up to corporate bullies. It felt right somehow. Meanwhile, Sarah and Mark were working through their issues. They had moved into separate homes, but were attending counseling together. Mark had taken a position with the Financial Oversight Committee, using his experience to help identify and prevent corporate extortion. One evening, Sarah called me over to her new apartment. She had been working late hours, throwing herself into protecting her company from potential threats. Dad, She said as we sat on her balcony, "I need your advice. Not as a father, but as someone who spent their life teaching people to make better choices." I waited, letting her gather her thoughts. Mark's been different since everything happened. More honest, more vulnerable. The counselor says he's doing the work, really trying to change. But I don't know if I can ever trust him again. Trust isn't just given back, I said, remembering countless conversations with students who had betrayed each other's confidence. It's rebuilt, slowly, through actions rather than words. She nodded. He's been offered a position heading up an anti-fraud task force, using his experience to help other companies protect themselves. He asked me to write him a recommendation. And part of me wants to. The part that remembers the man I married, who supported me through building my first company. But another part can't forget what he did to you. I thought carefully before responding. You know, in 30 years of teaching, I learned something important about mistakes. It's not the mistake itself that defines someone. It's what they do afterward. Sarah stared out at the city lights. He did help bring down Whitman, risked everything to make it right. People can surprise us, I said. Sometimes the worst choices lead to the best changes. The next week, I started my new role as a consultant for the FBI's Corporate Crime Division. My first case involved meeting with a young executive who had been caught in a scheme similar to Mark's. She sat in my office, terrified of losing everything. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, echoing words I had heard from countless students over the years. They just kept asking for more. I shared Mark's story with her, showing how cooperation and honesty could lead to redemption. By the end of our meeting, she was ready to talk to the investigators. More cases followed. My teaching experience proved invaluable in helping people find the courage to come forward. Each story added another piece to the puzzle of corporate corruption we were uncovering. Sarah's company implemented stringent security measures, becoming a model for corporate transparency. She even developed software specifically designed to detect patterns of extortion and fraud. Mark, true to his word, devoted himself to helping other companies protect themselves. His insider knowledge of how these schemes worked made him an invaluable resource. He and Sarah continued their counseling, slowly rebuilding what had been broken. As for the $480,000, I finally decided what to do with it. With Sarah's help, I established a foundation providing legal support to whistleblowers and victims of corporate fraud. We named it the Second Chance Foundation, believing that everyone deserves an opportunity to make things right. 1 year after the night in the restaurant when everything came to light, we all gathered for dinner again. Different restaurant, different circumstances, but the same people, changed by experience. Looking around the table, I saw not the mistakes that had brought us here, but the strength that had emerged from facing those mistakes honestly. Sometimes the hardest lessons teach us exactly what we need to learn. 5 years have passed since that fateful dinner when my daughter asked about money I'd never received. What began as a family crisis evolved into something far more meaningful than any of us could have predicted. The Second Chance Foundation has since helped over 300 whistleblowers come forward, leading to the exposure of dozens of corporate fraud schemes. Each case reminds me of that night when Mark's glass shattered on the restaurant floor, symbolizing how quickly a carefully constructed facade can collapse. Sarah and Mark's story took an unexpected turn. After 2 years of separation and intensive counseling, they chose to give their marriage another chance. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. It was built on hard work, brutal honesty, and a shared commitment to making things right. Mark's anti-fraud task force has become one of the most respected organizations in corporate oversight. He now speaks at conferences, sharing his story openly and using his past mistakes to help others avoid similar paths. Sometimes, he often says, you have to lose everything to understand what matters most. Sarah's company revolutionized corporate security software, incorporating lessons learned from our ordeal. She ensured every employee had clear, safe channels for reporting concerns without fear of retaliation. The culture she built emphasizes transparency and ethical behavior above all else. As for James Whitman, he served 3 years in federal prison and provided evidence that led to the conviction of dozens of other corporate extortionists. The network he exposed reached into some of the nation's largest financial institutions, sparking major reforms in corporate governance. I still consult with the FBI, though less frequently now. My role has shifted toward mentoring younger agents who work with whistleblowers. They jokingly call it the Parker Method, using old teaching techniques to help people find their courage. The most rewarding moments come when former victims return to help others. Just last month, the young executive I first counseled 5 years ago came back to speak to a group of frightened whistleblowers. Watching her share her story of recovery and redemption, I saw the same strength I once saw in Mark. My modest home has become a regular meeting place for our extended family of fraud survivors. We gather monthly, sharing stories and supporting one another. The coffee still comes in those old teaching mugs, their faded inspirational quotes carrying new meaning now. Last week, Sarah and Mark announced they're expecting their first child. At the celebration dinner, Sarah raised her glass, everyone holding theirs a little tighter, remembering that night 5 years ago. To second chances, she said, and to my father, who taught us that it's never too late to do the right thing. Mark added, and to the lesson that sometimes the worst mistakes can lead to the best outcomes, if we're brave enough to face them. I looked around the table at these people who'd been through so much. My daughter, stronger and wiser, my son-in-law, humbled and reformed, and the extended family of survivors and fighters we'd gathered along the way. The $480,000 that was stolen from me ended up creating something priceless. A legacy of helping others find their way back from the brink. As I prepare to fully retire next month, I'm reminded of what I always told my students. Life's greatest lessons often come from our biggest mistakes. The measure of a person isn't in never falling, but in how they rise after the fall. Today, Sarah and Mark run the Second Chance Foundation together, turning their painful experience into a force for positive change. The foundation has expanded to include educational programs on corporate ethics and support services for families affected by fraud. Looking back on that dinner 5 years ago, when a dropped glass revealed a web of lies, I realized it was never just about the money. It was about the choices we make when faced with fear, the courage it takes to admit our mistakes, and the power of forgiveness to transform lives. As I sit on my porch watching the sunset, I think about the students I taught over 30 years, the lessons about integrity and courage I tried to pass on. I never imagined my greatest test of those principles would come during retirement, or that my final teaching role would be helping to heal the wounds of corporate fraud. Sometimes the best endings come from the worst beginnings. All it takes is the courage to face the truth and the wisdom to learn from it.